Let me speak to you about the situation in the state of Indiana and then talk to you about the actions that we've taken in dealing with this serious shortage of propane facing Hoosiers and Hoosier businesses. Nearly 10% of Indiana residents use propane to heat their homes. It's approximately 500,000 Hoosiers. In the Midwest, 63% of the propane market uses propane for residential or commercial heating. The agricultural sector uses 13% of propane in the Midwest. Like others all across the Midwest, Hoosiers are facing this shortage because of an unusually wet fall grain harvest, which required high volumes of propane for grain dryers, and the extreme cold winter that we've all been facing with and dealing with, particularly in the month of January. Midwest propane prices have more than doubled in the past week at the regional supply hubs. The typical price this time of year, for instance, is about $2.50 a gallon, but prices are $5 and up, according to the Energy Information Agency. Some of that price increase has been passed along to retail consumers, and it's resulting in some cases of a doubling of the monthly heating bill for Hoosier families. This is working a hardship on Hoosier families, small businesses, and family farms, and it explains the reason why the state of Indiana has taken the action we've taken to date and will continue to lean into this effort to deal with this supply shortage and deal with the hardship that it's placing on Hoosiers. These increased demands and due to the cold weather as well as the reduction in supply accounts for the impact on pricing. But let me speak to the steps that we've taken so far and the steps that I'm announcing today. First, on January 3rd, I issued an emergency proclamation to waive the limit on hours of service for propane transporters to help suppliers better meet the market demands. I extended that order on January 17th due to the shortage. Suppliers are only able to provide customers with partial fill, which then requires repeated trips to refill. With my emergency declaration in place, the Attorney General issued a release warning propane companies not to price gouge customers and instructing customers regarding how to report suspected price gouging. Secondly, I ordered INDOT to switch their propane-capable fleet, which consists of 575 light-duty trucks, to an alternate fuel. They have been using unleaded gasoline since last week, and with the expectation of more winter weather around the corner, let me note that this change has no impact on our ability to keep our roads passable and clear snow as this difficult winter continues. Now today, I am taking further action. First, I am extending my original emergency proclamation, which eases restrictions on the hours of service for propane transporters until March the 1st. Secondly, today I am declaring an energy emergency and suspending limitations on divisible loads for propane suppliers, as well as directing the Indiana Department of Transportation and the Department of Revenue to work with the Indiana Motor Carriers Association to expedite permit applications and waive fees on overweight loads carrying propane. These actions will help propane suppliers run at full capacity. Now, for public safety, drivers with overweight and oversized loads will have to contact the Department of Revenue to provide them with their route, the truck, weight, and size configuration. In recognition of the challenges many of our low-income neighbors are facing as the cold weather continues, we also will be announcing in a few moments some changes to our low-income housing energy assistance program, and I'll let the Lieutenant Governor detail those changes for you in just a minute. Our administration is going to continue to pursue every avenue available to us to help Hoosiers through this severe shortage in propane during this difficult winter. But let me issue a call to action as well. I want to urge Hoosiers to do what Hoosiers do best, and that is this is just the time for us to come alongside our neighbors and friends who might be struggling with the the high energy costs or the shortages precipitated by the circumstances in the propane market. In particular, we want to urge every Hoosier to do what you can to conserve your use of propane energy. Turn down the thermostat. If you're away from home, turn it down a little bit more than you usually would. By lowering the temperature and lowering consumption and increasing conservation, we will ease the burden on the supply. If you've got alternative sources of heating your home or your business, we encourage you to take advantage of those sources today. And also, I want to urge everyone to be sensitive to their neighbors during this time. If you know of a Hoosier family who is struggling during this propane shortage, we urge you to either yourself or have them call 211, a statewide number which will put them or you in touch with what resources might be available to assist their family. Again, one of the great things about the state of Indiana is the way Hoosiers come alongside neighbors during difficult times, and this is such a time for the 500,000 Hoosiers who depend on propane to heat their homes and their businesses. Also, we would encourage those in the agricultural marketplace to examine your own storage of propane and to determine whether or not there might be excess propane and reserves in the tanks on your farm. If you are able to contact the local supplier, allow them to come and collect those reserves and make those available, particularly for Hoosiers and livestock. That would also ease the burden on the supply. So we're calling on Hoosier individuals to practice conservation. We're calling on Hoosiers to look after your neighbors, and we're calling on people in the agricultural sector to be sensitive and go check your tanks. And if you don't need that propane, let your supplier know so they might be able to come out and get that back into the marketplace for some of those in our livestock sector that might truly need it. As segments of the agricultural economy rely heavily on propane, in certain instances that shortage is hitting them particularly hard. So I want to recognize Lieutenant Governor specifically today in two capacities. One is as my partner in this administration, but also as the Secretary of Agriculture, to talk about increases in our energy assistance programs and particularly the impact on the agricultural industry of this propane shortage. So,
thank you, Governor, and certainly appreciate all the actions that you have taken on behalf of the state. And let me just talk a little bit more about the program that the Governor referenced, which we use as our state's energy assistance program, really ensuring the most vulnerable Hoosiers have heat. As a little bit of background, you heard him introduce a term called LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which is managed by our Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority under the leadership of Jake Sipes. It really does assist Hoosiers meeting those energy needs. To be eligible for that program, you must be at or below the 150% of the federal poverty level, or about $35,000 for a family of four. The applications for that program are processed by the local community action centers. To address this situation even more closely and carefully, Jake and his team really developed the following action. As of today, IHCDA has released an additional $5 million to the LIHEAP funds, which will go to the local service providers, allowing those who are out of or nearly out of propane the ability to increase their benefit from $400 through this winter season that ends in March, or the end of March, to $550 for the season, from $400 to $550. We think that's very substantial and should be of good help. Now, Tara Edwards, is Tara here? Tara, raise your hand high. She's been working very closely with the Community Action Network, and we appreciate all you're doing to monitor this and make sure we're doing everything we can for our most vulnerable Hoosiers. To receive additional information about eligibility or how to process that, please contact our Housing and Community Development Authority, and I'm going to give you a number, 1-800-872-0371, or as Governor shared, call 211, and that will put you in touch with your local community action program. So that speaks to really the care of our most vulnerable Hoosiers. But now let me switch gears into agriculture. We know that propane not only affects residential users, but also agriculture. You know, they rely primarily on propane for heating purposes like poultry, pork, dairy, and grain drying during the harvest. However, we clearly understand the human element is of the utmost importance. Poultry and pork use a propane for heating, notably for baby chicks and piglets that rely on that heat to survive, so it is very important. Most mature animals are large enough to produce their own heat. However, propane is still important in some of their operations like cleaning and sanitizing dairy equipment. We've learned that commercial grain operations and corn farmers may have some excess propane left over from last season's fall drying season, as the governor mentioned. Thus, the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, led by Ted McKinney, as you heard introduced, has asked the grain licensors, those commercial grain operations, to see if they are able to help by checking their tanks to see if any residual propane fuel exists from the grain drying season. Likewise, Indiana Farm Bureau, Indiana Corn Growers, and the Indiana Soybean Alliance have reached out with a similar request to their thousands and tens of thousands of members, asking them to do likewise. And so we appreciate Don Vilwalk, Jane Aid Stevens, Dr. Brett Marsh, your work, and Beth, as a pork producer, you're over here now, and certainly Scott Imus and Mike Hayden and as the propane producers, because they've really gotten together to try to facilitate the movement of that extra propane to ensure the safety of Hoosiers and the livestock welfare. And we know our ag industry will do everything they can to assist others. And so again, to really say once more to the governor's request, we ask for those who are listening out there who have excess propane and are willing to provide assistance, we ask that you contact your local propane supplier to sell it back or credit back that extra fuel to increase public distribution. You know, it's also unfortunate that several farmers and producers have reported that they have had their contracts broken or have fallen subject to increased propane fuel prices. For those who feel they are being mistreated by price gouging, we ask that you contact our Indiana Attorney General's office at 317-232-6201. Again, we want to do everything we can to facilitate getting that propane to those who need it most, including those vulnerable Hoosiers and those who have livestock. Every bit helps, and someone could definitely use this assistance. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to the governor, and I think we may be open to some questions.
Great. Thank you, Sue. Let me welcome some questions on topic, but again, I want to encourage all of you. We've got some very significant leaders in the industry, and they'll be available to members of the media after we complete our press conference. So with that, open to questions.
Senate has opened up a legislation that's moving through right now that would suspend the state sales tax on propane,
right,
so to give Hoosiers some relief. Is there anything you can do executively with the Department of Revenue, maybe to expedite that, maybe halt collections or stop collections in the short term?
Well, let me say, I think the actions that we're taking today are all focused on trying to bring some real relief, particularly to disadvantaged Hoosiers with the expansion of availability of the LIHEAP funds, and also doing what we can to increase access to supply. But we'll continue to consider proposals by members of the General Assembly and look at what authority is available to us under the law. This is it. It is not an overstatement to say that we are facing a serious shortage in propane, which is having an impact on Hoosier families and Hoosier businesses and Hoosier agriculture And we're going to continue to avail ourselves and work with partners in the General Assembly to address the issue to the best of our ability.
I may have missed this, but where are the additional LIHEAP dollars coming from?
Sue, you want to speak to that?
The additional LIHEAP funds that we have typically are reserved for the summer cooling season, so we will be reallocating those resources to our heating program.
So what happens if we need them?
We're continuing to monitor that. We also are expecting some additional funding through the LIHEAP program, possibly later this year. So I think we'll continue to look at the impact that it may have on the summer heating or cooling season. But right now, we think those funds right now are best used at this time.
And it is at its core a federal program, and we'll work very closely with the delegation in Washington to ensure that those resources are available, particularly given the difficult nature of this winter all across the country. I would fully expect Congress to address that question, and Indiana will be a part of that dialogue going forward.
Governor, one of the primary questions I'm asked every day is, when are we going to get relief? When will we see these supplies returning to normal? What have you been told so far?
Well, let me say that one of the reasons that we took the action that we took in early January was to do what was possible to open up avenues for the supply by easing the hours that applied to transportation. Today's effort to declare an emergency, to suspend limitations on divisible loads, again, is an effort on our part to make it possible. But I want to be very clear about this. We're facing a shortage of propane in the Midwest and in this country, and it is a shortage that is a result of something of a perfect storm between a season that required more energy utilization for drying grain, combined with what I don't need to tell any of you has been one of the toughest winters that we've seen here in the Hoosier State and across the Midwest, and that combination is driving shortages. And so the efforts today, additional assistance to low-income Hoosiers for the cost of to move their product above the usual requirements for limitations on loads, are all an effort to open up those supplies. But it's one of the reasons the last thing I said was really a call to action. I think Hoosiers need to recognize that whether it be people on the farm, as the Lieutenant Governor said, take a walk out in the snow and look in that tank. And if you've got some excess reserves, call your supplier. Credit it back, sell it back. We're also calling on Hoosier homeowners and businesses to look for additional ways that they can practice conservation, because this is a very acute shortage, and I think a combination of conservation, utilizing the resources that we may have in the state that are available and going unused, and also easing the ability to transport those resources from those supply hubs, all should combine to begin to bring relief to Hoosiers.
Is there any part of the state that's experiencing a bigger shortage of propane than others, or is it universal?
I don't know. I don't have county by county for you, but I can get that. But this is, 10% of Hoosier residents rely on propane. It's 500,000 people. And obviously we've talked a great deal about the impact of propane in our agricultural sector. So this is working a hardship on Hoosier families and small businesses and family farmers. And the action we've taken earlier this month is reflective of that, the action we're taking today, and we're going to remain determined to use the authority that we have under the law to help Hoosiers through this very difficult shortage. Chris, it's going to be an ongoing process for us. The state of Indiana, got out in front of this in early January, and we've been monitoring it very closely. And Lieutenant Governor and her responsibilities, and our whole administration are continuing to watch the markets. And I have to tell you, particularly, my concern is for Hoosiers who might be doing without. And that's why I really, you don't have to ask Hoosiers to look out for their neighbors, but it's a good reminder to people that there are some of our neighbors who are experiencing shortages. And so reaching out particularly to the elderly, particularly to vulnerable Hoosiers, making sure they avail themselves of that 211 number, making sure that low-income Hoosiers know that there's additional assistance available, as in some cases they might see a doubling of their monthly heating bills and the hardship that represents. This is really a time for all of us to come alongside one another. And I want to thank all of the stakeholders that are gathered here today. I think what you see is a concerted effort by our administration, by the agricultural industry, and by the energy industry in this state. We're going to work our way through this, but Hoosiers deserve to know this is a serious time, and we need to continue to confront it seriously.
Are there any loan opportunities for local suppliers who are having trouble affording the shipments to get to them? I talked to the supplier today that said an upfront payment of $50,000, he just can't afford that. He did it for his customers.
I'm not aware of that kind of assistance that is available, but I will tell you, in talking to the suppliers, and there'll be some folks here today you can talk to afterwards. I mean, there's just shortages at the hubs, and we need to just continue to work very diligently to continue to ease transportation restrictions and encourage conservation by Hoosiers as we move forward and expand the kind of assistance to low-income Hoosiers that will ease the burden of the additional costs on their family budgets during the course of this winter.
Governor, have you talked to the rail companies at all about getting rail transportation? You talked primarily about trucks, but tankers that we could get in here would help?
Our focus has been on 18 wheels. My sense is that this is an industry that moves on 18 wheels. But we'll continue to look at every means of transportation and evaluate if there's ways that we can increase the flow of supply. Thanks, and our guests are available if you'd like to visit with any of them. I appreciate your attention to this issue.